Hello, and welcome to the Commander Theory Podcast. I'm Nick Beatman, and I'm here with my friend, Zach Kmack.
Hello, theorists.
So in today's episode, we're going to be focusing on how Kaldheim has impacted the Brawl format on Arena, and we're also going to be talking about how Historic Anthology 4 is shaping the Historic Brawl format. But before we jump in, I want to briefly talk about our Patreon. If you head on over to patreon.com/Commander Theory, you can support the show and get sweet benefits for as little as $1 a month. If you aren't ready to be a patron yet, you can help us out by rating or reviewing us on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher. All right, with that, let's talk a bit about what the Kaldheim Brawl metagame looks like.
Yes.
I've been seeing a few decks a bit more than others. What's your experience been like?
So I also have been seeing a few decks more than others. I would say that they're just from qualitative experience. I have been seeing a certain three commanders a little bit more than others. Although in general, I feel like I'm playing a pretty diverse cast of commanders. In both Historic Brawl and regular Brawl, I think. So do you want to kind of see if that matches up with any data that we might have?
Yeah, so it definitely feels like a more diverse metagame than what we saw right after Zendikar Rising released, with like Omnath taking up a huge chunk of the metagame. It's a little bit more spread out, but just looking at the Brawl metagame as it's described on MTG Goldfish, we see that Esika, God of the Tree, is taking up 10.5% of the meta. Yeah, big chunk there. Tergrid, God of Fright, is coming up in second with 7.7% of the meta. We have Jorn, God of Winter, at 7.2% of the meta, and then it kind of flattens out after that. But really, like, I'm seeing this, to be fair, like this data set is just deck lists that people have hosted on the site. So yes, it may skew a little bit from what's actually being played on Arena. My personal experience, I've definitely seen a lot of Esika. I've definitely seen a lot of Tergrid, and I haven't really seen that much Jorn. I don't know what you're...
Yeah, I feel like I see Jorn as like a distant fourth to, say, like a Coma or something like that, where you can kind of guarantee that you're going to stick your commander. Jorn, there's not like a lot of rewards in regular Brawl for just like untapping your mana. You don't really have like a Jin-Gitaxias or something big with flash. So there's not a lot of like super good mana sinks right now. So it really feels like when people are playing Jorn, they're not playing Jorn. I've seen they're playing the Rhyme Staff, which has a little bit better return on the build around investment, I guess.
Yeah, I think with the Rhyme Staff, there's like a lot of benefits. The first and foremost being the fact that it's just more resilient. Whereas Jorn, you know, he's 3 toughness. You got to wait a whole turn before he's really going to have an impact. So it's just very easy to kill. And like the thing is, if you have to keep recasting Jorn, then like the benefit gets kind of,
it lessens over time for sure.
Yeah, because if you like play him for 3 and he dies, and then you play him for 5 and then he dies, and then play him for 7 and then you get your first trigger. I don't know if your whole deck is like built around like making use of lots of mana, but you're kind of wasting all of it on Jorn.
Yeah, I've noticed something that is true of Jorn is that they don't really attack with him unless it's safe, and I think that kind of just goes hand in hand with the fact that there's not a lot of ways to protect him in Brawl or even Historic Brawl that are like forward pushing, like building into your game plan.
That's a great point.
Yeah, like casting a Heroic Intervention to save your Jorn when you attacked into a full board just doesn't seem like a good investment.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't have evasion. He can't really like punish your opponents that well for blocking him.
Yeah.
And if you're like spending your mana to like cast a mammoth growth or whatever, or just like pump him up so he'll survive, that's then the benefit of him attacking is greatly lessened because you're using most of it up to protect him.
Yes.
But let's talk a bit about some of these other commanders that we're seeing a lot more. I want to start by getting into Esika, because this definitely, like, right after the format rotated, right after Kaldheim first became legal, I saw so many Esika decks, or rather so many prismatic bridge decks. It's 10.5% of the meta is still a significant amount, but it's less than what I was seeing right when the format rotated into Kaldheim Brawl. But man, pretty much none of these decks are using like Esika for the front half. It's all just prismatic bit bridge, and it's really just like 5-color haymakers, like the best. Like, you got your Ugins, you got your Vorinclexes, you've got just like the biggest and baddest creatures and planeswalkers available in the format.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something I've noticed with the bridge decks is that they're kind of flavor, like, it's to taste. What haymaker in what color do you want to win with this deck is kind of what I've seen with Esika. They tend to run Ugins, they tend to run Massacre Worms, but it's really, what colors do you like? What threats do you like?
I think part of it is, and maybe part of the reason that Esika is appealing, is that people, like, because you're in 5 colors, you have so many different options for haymakers to play. You don't feel like you have to craft a bunch of cards in order to make the deck work.
Yeah.
Like, you can kind of just use what haymakers you have available, and the deck is still going to be good. It's still going to function.
Yeah, I actually totally agree with that, because I think that is one of the reasons that they have been kind of pushing these 5-color archetypes a lot, is that the pressure to really like build an optimized list, and this is actually a point I'm going to bring up in regards to some of the other commanders we're going to talk about, is lessened. So you still want to play, you still want to build, you might still want to craft some cool mythics or rares or something for your brawl deck, but you can kind of just, like, if you have a Kogla, you can put the Kogla in. If you have a Goldwing Dragon or Goldspan Dragon, you can just put that in. It doesn't really matter what haymaker. It just is like, what you have, it's probably good enough if it's big. Let's go. Let's play some Brawl.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think, well, I guess I don't want to get into this just yet. Let's talk a bit about like the strengths and weaknesses of the deck.
Yeah.
In playing against Esika, what appears to be like the strengths of the deck, the things you're most worried about?
Yeah, the one thing that I always feel when I see an Esika is, do I have an answer? Because I think one of the biggest strengths is, if you can't answer the bridge, it will just win for you. If you don't have an answer for the bridge, if it's just sitting there left unanswered for 2-3 turns, it's probably game over for you at that point, because they've gotten a mana investment of anywhere from like 10 to 16. They have these giant permanents that they cast for free on top of whatever's in their hand. It's pretty hard to come back from something that impactful activating that many times. Even if the first time is a dud, if the second time isn't a dud, but the first time they still got like a 5/5 or something, it's going to be pretty hard to come back from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I've noticed is, like, because there's so many haymakers in the deck, because the card quality is so high, even if you do answer the bridge, you still have to contend with, the Ugins, the Koglas, all the format's most powerful cards. So you really have to be packing a lot of answers if you want to play a long game against an Esika deck.
Yeah, like, it's really common for them to like randomly drop into a Massacre Worm and then just cast, like you said, a Kogla or a Coma or something for their turn. So
Mhm.
not only did they get a big donk for free that's going to accrue value and make your life miserable, they also cast a really big donk that's going to accrue value and make your life miserable. So it doesn't necessarily matter if the bridge gets blown up once or twice, because they're usually playing enough ramp to get back to it pretty quickly, and if not, they're playing enough ramp to just cast the 7 mana spells that have like been stuck in their hand.
Mhm.
But
Yeah, so it's a real challenge for sure.
but that kind of leads to ways to beat this deck. There are pretty there's some pretty foolproof ways to take out an
Mhm.
Essica list, a prismatic bridge list, before it just overwhelms you in 6, 7, 8 drops.
Yeah, definitely. So one thing I noticed is even though Essica decks tend to run a bit of ramp, at least to enough ramp to get them from like 3 to 5, still they're just kind of doing a lot of nothing in the very early turns of the game. They're going to be playing a lot of tap lands because it's a 5-color mana base. So really, it's kind of turn 1 and 2, not really doing anything. Turn 3, play a mana accelerant. Turn 4, play the bridge and pass.
Yeah.
And then turn 5 is when they will really start doing stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're playing a really aggressive deck, if you're playing something that can come in and really make the most use of those first 4 or so turns of the game, then you can kind of get in for a lot of damage and really put them on the back foot. And then maybe if you're playing like a red red aggroed list, then you can just kind of burn them out after that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a similar experience playing like White Weenie, Boros, Mono Red or Red Black, kind of Berserkers, low to the ground, just whatever kind of you can do to get in under them, maybe mix in a little bit of disruption to taste, and it's kind of hard for them to come back from that when they kind of start playing the game at like 8 life.
Mm-hmm.
So the other one that I've seen that I've kind of taken advantage of a lot when I've been playing too is they, like we said, they have a lot of haymakers in their list. So they will tap out to cast a haymaker each turn, typically. So if they're tapping out to cast one big spell each turn, then cheap counter spells go a long way for
Mm-hmm.
just completely wrecking that game plan. Just casting a what's the dismissal?
Disdainful Stroke,
Yeah,
or
casting a disdainful stroke, even just like an essence scatter, something like that. Like that's all it really takes to throw back an Essica list and really kind of ruin their day and
Mm-hmm.
give you enough kind of time and mana investment to push over them before they can get set up.
Yeah, I've had a lot of success with my Kaza list, which just runs a lot of cheap wizards, and so you can sort of like make use of the first couple turns setting up with your wizards, and then you're able to just answer. You don't have to like answer every single spell they cast for the entire game, but you just have to keep them on the back foot long enough for your wizards to do the trick and get in there.
Yeah.
So I think that's definitely a weakness of the deck, is like when they are tapping out for 5, 6, 8 mana spells, your ability to cheaply answer that and then also develop your board is gonna make it a lot easier for you to win.
Yeah. There's a point I want to bookmark this because that point, the counterspells point, will come up again later in this episode.
Mm-hmm.
But do you want to talk about Turgrid, the next most popular commander?
Yeah, I don't know what your experience has been like, but I've found this not especially fun to play against.
It's miserable.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's going to be a lot of discard in these decks, which is really a challenge if you're a slower or more controlling build. They're just going to be able to pull out all your answers, pull out your card advantage engines. And if you're running a more creature-based decks, like they have so much removal, and they're just going to chew through it.
Yeah. I had to stop running. I had a Phylath list that I would run every now and then for like when I'd get the like play 40 lands like quest for the day.
Yeah, or
And,
like the red green spells.
and I just
quest,
can't do that anymore because if I play against a Turgid and they start making me discard my haymakers, it just scoop on the spot. It's just not worth it. The discard is just gnarly. It's so nasty.
Yeah.
But I think the other side of that too is that they also I've seen about as many Turgid lists that are like really maximizing Turgid as I've seen Lantern lists that are just like trying to beat you down with Lantern activations. And that really can, depending on what deck I'm playing in the moment, can really hamper game plan because they're going to chew through my life total and then they're going to eat through my hand or whatever board thingies. I don't really need tokens or artifacts, and then if I don't have an answer or a way to kill them, that's it.
Yeah, no, it's kind of funny. The Turgid decks, honestly, I don't think they get a lot of value out of the Turgid half of the card. Because in my experience playing against these, their first like 4 turns of the game is just they're killing my stuff, they're making me discard, et cetera. Then they're probably going to cast Turgid on turn 5 or 6, but I usually have an answer for it by then, and it's not like it costs so much mana that they can't like do Turgid and do something else to trigger Turgid in the same turn. What tends to happen is like I kill Turgid maybe once, maybe twice, and then they just give up and cast the Lantern and try to kill me. That's been my experience.
That has also been my experience. And this is, again, note the counter spells, because I think one of the strengths of Turgid is that you don't need to play threats. You can just pack your deck full of discard, sacrifice, so that answers creatures, that answers cards in hand, that answers counter spells they may or may not have, and then you can just win with the Lantern. You can win with their threats that they sacrifice or discard if you do happen to stick a Turgid. That's like one of the biggest benefits, one of the strengths of the list is that you are just all answers, you're all gas, and you can just don't really have to think about, well, how am I going to win? Because you just kind of have that built in your commander on either side. And the weakness to this is exactly like you said. It's just counter spells, it's card draw, it's if you're winning with like non-permanent win cons, whether that's burn spells, whether that with like a Toralf or something like that, whether that's like just counters and value and drawing your draw spells back and milling them out. Like they only really have so much they can do along the axis of plays in mono black that when you assault them from different angles like that, or maybe all you need is just a few tokens on the board that they can't make you sacrifice through, and you just keep beating them down with a token and an equipment or something like that. Like it's pretty fragile as long as you're playing around Turgid actually coming down at the right time or the Lantern being there.
Yeah, and one thing I've also noticed is because they're the like 2 main axes of the deck kind of attack different archetypes. Like, discard is really good against control, and the removal is really good against aggressive strategies. I found that like sometimes the Turgid deck is just going to draw the wrong half of their deck to deal with whatever you're doing, and you can kind of get like free-ish wins when that happens.
Definitely played some lists where they're making me discard and discard and discard, and then I just play my my Merfolk that gets back an instant or sorcery, and I get back my thing that gets back kicker spells or whatever it might be, and it just like, well, okay, you didn't actually hurt me there. Or worst case scenario for them, like I discard my big thing and then reanimate it on turn 5 or 6. Like they can just get unlucky against you sometimes.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. Sometimes I run an aura list, and like them, activating the Lantern is basically like a free sack outlet for me. It's like, oh, thank you.
Yeah, I've experienced.
Great, now I can get back this other guy.
Yeah, I've experienced the exact same thing. They're like, all right, do you want to sack a creature, lose 3 life? And I'm like, I would love to sack my 3-drop right now. Thank you. I didn't have a sack on board. This is great. So that is I think one of the weaknesses of Turgid is that they sometimes just don't draw the right cards in the opening hand. And I think if we're good, do we want to move on to the other one we're gonna kind of focus on?
Yes. This is one that just really seems like the commander out of Kaldheim that I'm most scared of.
Yes.
And I'm surprised we aren't seeing like more adoption of this. This is Koma Cosmos Serpent. It is 3 green, blue for a 6/6 legendary creature serpent. At the beginning of each upkeep, create a 3/3 serpent named Koma's Coil, and then you can sacrifice a serpent to either make Koma indestructible or to tap target permanent. And also it can't be countered. Sorry, I forgot.
Yeah, that's important.
So this is something that is resistant to counter spells, difficult to burn out, pretty much impervious to board wipes. It makes an army very quickly, and because you're in a green color identity, you have access to green ramp, and it can come down earlier than its mana cost would suggest. So this is a very strong card. What's your experience been like playing against Koma?
Pretty similar to what you're saying. There's usually a little bit of ramp. Their game plan usually doesn't have to be super consistent because what I mean by that is like you don't need to like build around Koma other than ramping a little bit, just because Koma is so big, so impactful, so hard to deal with that if you just kind of land a Koma, you're pretty likely to win. They have to have a very specific suite of answers, and I feel like not everyone is currently running those answers. So you can get some free wins pretty easily if you are playing Koma just by turn 4 or 5 landing a really early Koma. It can't be countered like the other commanders can. If it's left alone, it just wins really quickly. And because you are ramping so much, the commander text doesn't really matter. So if they do find a way to answer it one time, they better have a second one because it's probably coming down in a turn or two. So it's miserable in a very different way than playing against Turgid can be. But
absolutely.
That said, there are some pretty fun answers to Koma and ways that I've been including in pretty much every single list.
Yeah, it's definitely soft to aura-based removal. So a lot of the cards you were probably already running in Brawl, like Frogify, like Heliod's Punishment, like Kenrith's Transformation, all these things that are really effective at answering commanders are good against Koma. It's also soft to exile-based removal, so like Elspeth Conquers Death, Feed the Serpent, ironically.
I know.
And a couple other effects like that. Eat to Extinction, for example, are all very good against answering Koma because the indestructibility doesn't really help in that case. And then I've actually done a little bit of playtesting with Koma just to sort of see how it pilots and if there's any like thing that I find myself losing against. And a lot of my losses, I would say, are against stealing effects.
Yes, that's I did the exact same thing where I'm like, well, let's try building some different Komas and seeing what happens. And whenever I lose, it was to like an Akroan War. Like the Akroan War comes down, steals my Koma, and I kind of look and go, but like, I don't know what I'm gonna do here.
Yeah, wow, this commander really is unbeatable. No, I found the same thing. The Akroan War is just like the bane of Koma's existence. There's also that card from Zendikar Rising that costs less if an opponent has a certain number of cards in their graveyard. That's also fine against Koma, assuming your opponent can get the mana for it.
Yeah, the card's great, actually.
But yeah, those have been the things that typically I am losing to with Coma, because again, like they can do like exile based removal, but then I can just eventually recast Coma.
Mm-hmm.
And green does have some answers to auras. You just make sure to like pack in your Wilt or your Return to Nature or something like that.
Yeah,
but stealing effects are quite painful.
yeah. I think as the metagame has shifted over the time this set has come out, it was people have really shifted their removal package and their answers to be able to answer Coma more so than they were
Mm-hmm.
kind of at the beginning of things.
Yeah. One thing that I've started running in my Coma list to try to answer these stealing effects is bounce spells.
Oh yeah.
That'll definitely like get you out of that bind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think this kind of segues us into something that's interesting because there are a few new staples, and I think people will notice a trend as we go through them and as they've listened to us talk about bounce spells and things like that.
Mhm.
Do you mind if I lift off some of these cards that just we've been playing with a ton of since the format's come around?
Sure. Yeah. These are all new cards from Kaldheim, and you may be able to notice a trend, as Zach mentioned.
Yeah, so new staples thanks to Kaldheim that I know I've been playing with a ton, that we mentioned a few of them here. Disdainful Stroke, the card I couldn't remember the name of a few minutes ago. Saw it coming, both counter spells, both 2 mana. You have to put in a little bit of investment for the Saw it coming at first, but it's pretty worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Doomscar, just the best Wrath, just so good. Raven Form, giving blue an answer to artifacts is crazy good. It like
Mm-hmm.
feels like cheating sometimes. I don't know if you've experienced that, but
Yeah, and also just like the 1/1 doesn't really matter.
no.
Um, so it's also just like a really solid answer to opposing creatures, which blue can sometimes have trouble with after they resolve.
Yeah, exactly. And then the last one is Tybalt's Trickery, which has just been just I don't. There's been maybe one game out of 20 where they've flipped into something worse than
Mm-hmm.
what I counter.
Yeah.
Because you just, as long as you're thinking ahead, you're being smart, you're going, well, what is their game plan? What are they trying to do? You can Tybalt's Trickery, and then maybe they hit like a Bathe in Dragon's Fire or something, and you're like, okay, sure, like burn my guy. At least I don't lose to your Haymaker.
Yeah, there's definitely been a lot of games where it's like, well, I feel pretty good, but I could always lose to the Ugin.
Yeah.
And that's like where Tybalt's Trickery feels so good. Just like, even if you don't end up casting it, just knowing that you can get out of a hole
Yeah.
feels excellent. So I've been really happy to add that to my red decks.
Mm-hmm. And I think one thing before we move on to this next, we have some more staples for like Historic Brawl, is something people have noticed, and this is something I wanted to mention. Pre-Kaldheim coming out, if you listen to our last Brawl update episode, we were pretty down on blue. Blue was not really as playable as some of the other colors. You could play a Thassa list and do okay, but you had to have the answer for like a Scoot Swarm. You had to have uh, certain answers for other things. There's no way to deal with a big board, where now, even though blue still hasn't gotten a way to deal with a big board per se, just the control that blue has gotten, like these counter spells, and the way the metagame has shifted to being about haymakers as opposed to like being about tokens or being
Mm-hmm.
about lands or something like that. Blue is in a really good spot right now as far as Brawl is concerned. Like, I love playing blue in Brawl right now, and Historic Brawl.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that before Kaldheim came out, it was just more of your counter spells cost 3 mana, and
Yeah.
it just does not feel good to hold 3 mana open. But now with Disdainful Stroke, with Saw It Coming, you can hold as little as 2 mana open and feel reasonably protected.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just much easier for you to utilize your mana efficiently. There's also better card draw options because now you have a lot of really good instant speed. card draw spells with like Behold the Multiverse and Graven Lore.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you are like holding more mana up for your counter spells, you can also just like, well, they didn't cast anything good, so I'm gonna scry 5 and draw 3 cards. You can just better make use of your mana on your opponent's turns.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed that there's been multiple games where I've been playing blue X, whatever it is, and I've been like, oh, well, I'm going to pass with all my mana up, and I have mana to counter their spell. If they don't counter their spell, I can burn their guy. If I don't have to burn their guy, I can Graven Lore and draw a bunch of cards. And that is so good. That's so powerful. Just the ability to always be able to respond. That was just something blue did not have before. It's like, oh, well, I could counter their spell. I could bounce their thing with an Into the Royal. I could get back the spell from my graveyard. I could tap this thing. It's just so much more diverse. You have so many more options right now in blue than you did before. So definitely very into that, very happy with where blue is at right now. And I think you're in a good spot, even though the big three, like technically 2 of them are blue. It's really only Como that I've come across that's kind of packing their own counter magic typically, you know. I think blue puts you in a good spot against the big three, with stealing, with exile, with bouncing, with all of those things, where it just wasn't there before.
Yeah, and I just want to say one last thing before we sort of segue into the other format we're going to be talking about today, which is like sort of a general rule, a general like set of characteristics that I think is what make these big three the real titans of this new Brawl format.
Yeah.
Because like most of them like dodge traditional creature removal. I think that's really is what is making them so strong, and I think it might be like sort of an unintended consequence of the way they designed the gods this time around.
Yeah, I feel definitely.
Yeah, so just like Brawl decks typically run a lot of creature and planeswalker removal because, of course, that's what you're going to be. Your opponents are going to have at least one of those things. But the fact that your Esika opponent is always going to be playing an enchantment, and that's like what their deck is built around, and not every color can answer enchantments that effectively, or like Tergrid's Lantern being like the main win condition for these Tergrid decks, and not every color can answer artifacts effectively, or Koma just like having such high toughness that burn doesn't really do anything, and like really you need to have, and like counter spells aren't effective, and you really need to have like really narrow answers to Koma.
Oh yeah. Very specific.
Yeah, I think those are really what is making these guys sort of rise to the top of the format, just how difficult they are to answer. And I hope that in the future we see, the top spots in the format be taken up by cards that are more conducive to interaction, because I think that leads to more fun Magic than like, well, I'm playing mono red, so I can't answer this enchantment.
Yeah, and I think this also is to say, like, we started with saying that the format is more diverse than ever too, which is also true. Like, I think the big three being what they are is exactly for the reasons you said, but something about this big three makes people feel like they can experiment more or like play different things more, and it maybe is because people have to pack these like obtuse answers, like these answers that you wouldn't normally just like snap into a typical kind of 60 card list or standard list, you know. I've seen a bunch of like mono green, mono red, mono black, mono white. I've been running like a mono white Linden list with just a bunch of life gain triggers, and that's been winning a ton, which it did not before call time. So it's just interesting to see like that this big three is the big three and what that's kind of done to the format, because even though they are the highest percentage share of decks that I know I see personally, I still, it'll be like every third game is one of these big three for me. It'll be like I play against a Toralf, and then I play against a Toski, and then I play against an Essica, and then I play against a Thassa, and then I play against one of the mutate like beasts, and then I play against a Turgrid, and then like it feels like I'm seeing a pretty good rotation of decks, even though this big three is more or less omnipresent.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if there's anything you want to say, or do you want to just segue into this next little bit we're going to talk about?
Yeah, I am ready to move on. So just a couple days ago, Historic Anthology 4 was released. So it injected a bunch of new cards into Historic. And honestly, like looking at this array of cards, it feels less like they're trying to shake up the competitive Historic tournament metagame.
Yeah.
And maybe more that they're trying to give tools to Historic Brawl or like more casual Historic lists.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm going to read these off really quickly. They printed Triumphant Reckoning, which is 6 white sorcery. Return all artifact, enchantments, and planeswalker cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. Declaration in Stone, 1 and a white for a sorcery. Exile target creature and all other creatures its controller controls with the same name as that creature. That player investigates for each non-token creature exile this way. Thraben Inspector, 1 mana for a 1/2 human soldier. When it enters the battlefield, investigate. Think Twice, 2 mana instant, draw a card, flashback for 3. Spider Spawning, 4 and a green for a sorcery. Create a 1/2 green spider creature token with reach for each creature card in your graveyard, and flashback for 6 and a black. Adorn Pouncer, 1 and a white for a 1/1 cat. Double Strike, Eternalize for 3 white. There's some snow cards being added to the format.
Yeah, funny ones, honestly.
Yeah. We got Iceberg Cancrix, 1 and a blue for a 0/4 snow creature crab. Yeah. Whenever another snow permanent enters the battlefield under your control, you may have target player mill 2 cards.
So funny.
Yeah. There's Merit Lage's Slumber, 1 and a blue for a legendary snow enchantment. Whenever it or another snow permanent enters the battlefield under your control, scry 1. And at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 10 or more snow permanents, you can sacrifice it to create Merit Lage, a 20/20 black avatar creature token with flying and indestructible. Some interesting equipment matters cards. We've got Goblin Gavalier, single red for a 1/1 Goblin Warrior with Trample. That gets +2/+0 for each equipment attached to it. Bone Splitter, 1 mana equipment. Equipped creature gets +2/+0 and equipped for 1. Sword of Body and Mind.
I think this was a pretty interesting inclusion, honestly.
The Sword of Body and Mind.
Oh, yeah. That was a strange sword to pick.
Yeah. Definitely like the weakest of that cycle of, or of the enemy colored cycle of swords. So I think they were probably playing it pretty safe there. There was also several cards like left out of Amonkhet Remastered. It's a little strange that they're trying to re-inject these into the format or like make you pay a bunch of golden gems for them when they had an opportunity to, like, the perfect opportunity to print them 6 months ago.
There's a few cards in this release that I feel that way about, but we'll keep going and talk about it.
Yeah. Getting towards the end here, we've got some elf cards with Lisa Lana Huntmaster, 2 green for a 3/3 elf warrior. Whenever you cast an elf spell, you may create a 1/1 green elf warrior creature token. Abomination of Llanowar, newly printed from Commander Legends, 1 green black for a star elf horror. It has vigilance and menace, and its power and toughness are each equal to the number of elves you control plus the number of elf cards in your graveyard. There's Inspiring Statuary, omitted for some reason from Kaladesh Remastered. It's a 3 mana artifact. Non-artifact spells you cast have Improvise. Cold Steel Heart, 2 mana snow artifact. It enters the battlefield tapped. As it enters the battlefield, choose a color, and you can tap for 1 mana of the chosen color. Blinkmoth Nexus, which is a land that taps for C. You can pay 1 to have it become a 1/1 Blink Moth artifact creature token or artifact creature with flying until end of turn. It's still a land. You can pay 1 and tap it to give target Blink Moth creature +1/+1 until end of turn.
Yeah. Almost there.
Yeah, almost there. We've got Hamza, Guardian of Arashin, 4 green-white for a 5/5 Elephant Warrior. It costs 1 less to cast for each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it. And creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it. There's Amit Eternal, 2 and a black for a 5/5 Zombie Crocodile Demon with Afflict 3. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, put a -1/-1 counter on Amit Eternal. And when it deals combat damage to a player, remove all -1/-1 counters from it. We've got Sawtusk Demolisher from the Commander 2020 decks, which is 4 green for a 6/6 beast with trample and mutate for 3 and a green. And whenever this creature mutates, destroy target non-creature permanent. Its controller creates a 3/3 green beast creature token.
I'm happy that was here.
Yeah. It's a nice addition. There's also Harmless Offering, 2 and a red for a sorcery. Target opponent gains control of target permanent you control. Collected Conjuring, 2 blue-red for a sorcery. Exile the top 6 cards of your library. You may cast up to 2 sorcery spells with mana value 3 or less from among them without paying their mana costs. Put the exiled cards not cast this way on the bottom of your library in a random order. And then finally, there is Death's Shadow. 1 mana for a 13/13 avatar, and it gets -X, where X is your life total.
Yeah.
So what do you notice about these cards? What do you think is going to have the biggest impact on the historic Brawl format?
Yeah, I think for the most part, it's like you said, the cards that they have put in here are mostly things for historic Brawl as opposed to historic competitive. Honestly, the biggest thing that stood out to me was Merit Lage's Slumber, just because we got the Kaldheim release so recently. I think people those Jorn lists in Brawl are not as juiced as they might want to be, but Merit Lage's Slumber in historic gives it a little bit more oomph to kind of get back in there. And if you can end up popping it, and if they can answer the Merit Lage, at least you can get it back with the Rhyme Staff. So that was something I was thinking about.
I found that just in playing a little bit of Jorn in Historic Brawl, the snow cards generally haven't mattered up to this point.
Yeah.
It's mostly just been a way to double your mana. But adding more snow rewards is going to help that deck become more of what it wants to be, rather than just I'm playing Sultai good stuff and my commander makes my lands tap for twice as much.
Yeah, I'm actually fully expecting Historic Anthology, the next one, to have another 1 or 2 snow cards in them. Just because I think this is an archetype that they want to keep around, not specifically for competitive, but I think they know it has fans, and Historic Brawl, we'll kind of sum this up at the end, but has been building a fan base as more and more people play it and realize, oh, I can still play with this card. I can still play with my cards. Other ones kind of still in the snow wagon, but just good in general is Cold Steel Heart. 2 mana rocks, man. It's pretty good. And
yeah, there's definitely been a lot of lists where I've been running Guardian Idol, which is a mana rock that comes into play tapped, taps for a single colorless, and you can pay 2 to animate it and have it become a 2/2 construct. So there's definitely decks that are okay with their 2 mana rocks coming into play tapped.
Yeah, and then the last one is Declaration in Stone. It's a very powerful white removal spell. Giving him a clue doesn't really matter. It's not like you're going to be hitting honestly, I would hit a Scoot Swarm with a Declaration in Swarm if I had to. That's better than dying,
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely a powerful spell. I think those are the really big standouts for me. Everything else is kind of a role player. I'm not super pumped. I mean, I'm going to play Thraben Inspector, but it's not like I was hankering for a good one drop, like
Yeah, like I'll put an Adorned Pouncer in my Rin and Seri
yeah.
list. Sure.
Yeah, it's all kind of like interesting inclusions. Like Bone Splitter is great for Akiri or Halvar or whatever deck might want it, but it's not something I was like, it would make Historic Brawl incredible. A Bone Splitter. That's just not
Oh yeah.
not where I was at. But again, kind of you were mentioning some of the cards that they seem to like omit from Amonkhet Remastered. I feel like they did that with Inspiring Statuary. Like we got Kaladesh Remastered, and
Just a couple months ago, really.
yeah, not that long ago, and Inspiring Statuary wasn't in it. People asked why wasn't it in it, and they're like, "Oh, we couldn't put every card in it," and that makes sense. It's a remastered set, but now it's here.
Yeah, but if you want it in this card pool, like, did your minds really change that much? And well, part of it may have been like the rushed timeline for
Yeah.
developing Kaladesh Remastered, because that was something where it's like, wow, Amonkhet Remastered sold way better than we were expecting.
Yeah.
Just a lot more drafts firing than we thought was going to happen. So we're going to shift resources to get Kaladesh Remastered out as soon as possible, and that's a little bit more forgivable. That they might have left out a single card. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. It just is strange that it feels like there's like 5 or 6 cards in this release that like the Adorned Pouncer, the discard enablers.
Yeah. I don't have as good an excuse for the Amonkhet ones, because like they weren't really under like a rush deadline to produce that. That didn't seem it felt like they had more time to push that out.
Yeah, for sure. But that said, we've talked about this kind of new cards injected in the format. Kaldheim has obviously injected new cards into the format. Do you want to talk about some lists that you've been like super pumped about?
Yeah, so I'll start off by talking about Hamza. I think that this is a great commander for the +1/+1 counters cards that we've been seeing a lot of recently. It's just a really good way to focus your like conclave, your Oran Reef oozes, your all the, and also like a lot of the stuff that was printed in Jumpstart. Like Inspiring Call, like Armorcraft Judge. Like there's just been a lot of really good rewards for +1/+1 counters printed over the last 9 months ish. So it's great to be able to see that happening, or like see a commander that really puts all of those under one umbrella. So I've got a list for Hamza, and although it plays a bit differently from the commander version of Hamza, like you don't have access to nearly as many artifact creatures or creatures whose mana costs are entirely colorless mana that can be reduced down to 0. So it leans more into just the +1/+1 counter rewards cards. But it still seems like a really fun list, and it can do a little bit of comboing, just in the sense that, once you're reducing the cost of like all your creatures down to 1 or 2, then your Beast Whisperers, your Primordial Sages, your Great Henges, all of those kinds of cards are gonna just allow you to like dump your whole hand onto the board and immediately refill it with cards, and that's going to make it easy for you to win, I would say.
Yeah, I would say that the tidal wave of card advantage that you can accrue in that scenario is it's pretty strong.
Yeah. So I think that's a really fun list, and I'm definitely going to be taking it out the next Historic Brawl event we see. We also have like a really good black-green elf commander. I'm not referring here to Abomination of Llanowar, but rather to Tyvar Kell. Tyvar is just like exactly what the elf deck needs. I've managed to get a little bit of testing in with him already, and it just synergizes so well with what the deck is trying to do. There are a lot. So for example, like, being able to tap even your value elves like Reclamation Sage for mana, that's really valuable. It can make it so that Tyvar Kell, like just casting him is like mana neutral or even mana positive. when you're able to like recoup it by tapping all your guys. There's also a lot of like high value elves that can tap for a lot of mana at once, like Elvish Archdruid, like Marwyn the Nurturer. And being able to untap those with your Tyvar Kell is also another way to sort of like greatly reduce his effective cost. Pumping out elves that then tap for mana is really good. And then I have managed to pop the emblem on him, and it is exactly what you need to cast your entire library and win the game.
Yeah, he just seems like so perfect, so wonderful, and in a lot of ways, we mentioned this when we reviewed him. He's just like what an elf planeswalker should be. Just makes mana, pumps your guys up, makes guys if you don't have them, and if you do happen to pop them, you win.
Yep,
that's it. It's pretty hard to lose after that. So definitely really rad, and the tools that you have in Historic Brawl for an elf list are just like just so good. So really cool. It's a really cool list.
Yep. I think with that we can move on to the next one,
which is my favorite one on this list.
Yeah, do you want to read it off then?
Sure, yeah. So this is Burgeon Harnfell. This is mono red combo, would you say? I would say it's combo.
Yeah, I'd say it's combo.
Yeah, and so you're more focusing on the Harnfell half of the flip card, because if you can land it, if you can get to that 5 mana and just start pitching cards, that's it.
Yeah.
You pretty much win. There's just so many ways to accrue value when cards in hand are not an issue anymore. And oftentimes it's pretty easy to just dig through your list, find an Aetherflux Reservoir, and just shoot them with the Death Star right out of the gates, like in the same turn. It's really powerful. It's been really fun. And I don't know if there's anything you want to highlight in the list in particular.
Just that, like, there's, as you mentioned, there's a lot of different ways to get value while you're casting most of your library. Historic now has access to Young Pyromancer, Thermo Alchemist, Runaway Steamkin, Rockslide Sorcerer, Gutter Snipe, Firebrand Archer, Electrostatic Field. There are just so many things that, like, you stick this and then you cast a million spells with your Harnfell, and your opponent just like does not really have much of a life total left by the time you finish your turn.
Yeah, and if you have like multiple, if you cast like a turn 2 Firebrand Archer, a turn 3 like Gutter Snipe, and then like you land your Harnfell and then start going off, like they're probably just dead. It's pretty often that they're just dead. There's a lot of ways to like cheat on mana, get up ahead on mana, whether that's a Mox Amber or a Chandra Torch of Defiance giving you +2 red, or whatever it might be. There's just a lot of ways that Runaway Steamkin, like you said, is just so good in this list. I feel like if I have a Runaway Steamkin and it hasn't been answered when I play my Harnfell, I can't really lose. Like they better have an answer for the Harnfell if they didn't have an answer for the Steamkin, because I'm not gonna run out of steam anymore.
Yeah, I have solved for cards and for mana. Good luck, opponent.
Yeah, it's over. So definitely a really cool list. I think you can tell I'm a fan of mono red, so I'm pretty into this one in particular.
All right. With that, I think we can transition over to the next list we're going to talk about, and that is Orvar the Allform. So in a lot of ways, Orvar kind of looks, or the construction of the deck looks kind of similar to like a Thassa kind of list, a Thassa Deep Dwelling list, in that you're just running a lot of ETB creatures. But the way that this list makes use of them is slightly different. And so, for example, like blink spells are especially effective in this list. It's really strong to go like Orvar, and then next turn cast something like a Riverside or Riverwise Augur or a Solemn Simulacrum, some creature that just nets you some kind of mana. And then if you target it with like an Essence Flux, where you can, which is basically just a 1 mana blink spell, but you get a copy of the Solemn, and then you get to blink the Solemn, and suddenly you're just way far ahead of your opponents. There's just a lot of spells in this deck like that, which will give you a copy in addition to giving you the ETB effect one more time. And once you're doing that kind of thing on like Cavalier of Gales or Agent of Treachery or Meteor Golem, then it kind of becomes difficult to lose at that point.
It's pretty much impossible to lose if you've like Agent of Treachery enough times to just steal their 2 best permanents. Once you got 3 of their best permanents, and you're drawing from the draw trigger off of Agent of Treachery, and like you just have a bunch of your board is huge. Like there's just not really a way to come back from that.
Yeah, I've had games where and also like a lot of this deck functions at instant speed, so you can really surprise your opponents. I've had games where I've like attacked with Cavalier of Gales, and then my opponent alpha strikes into me, and then I like Essence Flux my Cavalier. So basically that one blinks in untapped. I get an untapped copy, and I just brick wall my opponents.
Yeah.
So yeah, really strong, fun deck. I definitely recommend checking that out when Historic is available.
Mm-hmm. And if you don't mind moving on, I'm really a fan of this next one too. This is Vega the Watcher. So again, it's a blue list, but it's using a lot of basically. I have a Vega Brawl list, and you pretty much have to run all of the foretell, more or less all the foretell cards to get value off of Vega, but that's not specifically true in Historic Brawl. You can run a lot of things that cast spells out of your graveyard and get a lot of value that way. You can cast the adventure cards that cast things from exile, which I guess you can do in Brawl too, but there's just all together, all combined, it adds up into a huge card advantage engine, and just the win conditions that you get in Historic Brawl are just a lot better than you get in just regular Brawl. Casting at Dusk, which is a Aftermath Wrath. So the front half is 2 and 2 white, destroy all creatures with power 3 or greater, doesn't hit Vega. And then being able to cast Dawn later on, draw a card, and put every creature with power 2 or less from your graveyard into your hand. Massive swing in cards, a massive swing in tempo, and a lot of your creatures do fit that category of having 2 power. So if they do happen to kill your Kira Great Glass Spinner, if they do happen to kill your Giant Killer, your whatever it might be, you can get them back, and you can have a pretty good time just accruing value with your little owl friend there.
Yeah, and I also love cards like Precognition Field, 3 and a blue for an enchantment. You may look at the top card of your library. You may cast the top card of your library if it's an instant or sorcery card, and you can pay 3 to exile the top card of your library. So again, that's another zone, like basically casting, a negate off the top of your library. That's a free card, and then you draw another card off Vega. It just feels so powerful. Yeah. Like you cannot go below 7 cards in hand when this deck is really rolling.
Yeah, I've had to discard to hand size a lot playing Vega in Historic. Speaking of discard, Narfi is the next one. Narfi, the Betrayer King. So Narfi is the 4/3 legendary snow creature. Is he a zombie noble? He's a zombie
wizard.
4/3 blue-black. Other snow and zombie creatures you control get +1/+1, and you can pay 3 snow to return him from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So what that means is that you only really spend the cost the 5 once, and then you never really have to spend commander tax. I also apologize, we haven't been reading off all of the commanders as we've been saying them, so sorry to people listening at home.
We recommend consuming this episode in video format.
Yeah, so we will have a video to go along with this episode, but we will try to read them off as we go. But this list is it's zombies. And it's a really good zombie list. There's a ton of zombies that cost 1 and 2 mana, so you can get going really early. You get your Dreadhorde Invasion, you get your Death Baron, which isn't historic, you get your Crypt Breaker, you get your Lazotep Reaver, which gives you 2 zombies. You get your Timurit Calls the Dead, which mills you and makes zombies. You can really flood the board with zombies, but then at the same time, you're in blue and black, so you also have access to Negate, Swan Song, Heartless Act, Thoughtseize. You can back up your army with a lot of these support spells. Is there anything you'd like to highlight from this list? This list is pretty cool.
Just that there's like a lot of kind of staple effects that synergize with zombies in some way or another. Like Murderous Rider, for example, like Swift End is just a useful utility spell that kills a creature or planeswalker, but the creature that goes on the adventure is a zombie knight. There's also Never to Return from Amonkhet Remastered. Never is basically a sorcery speed Swift End. And Return, the aftermath half of the card, exiles a card from a graveyard and creates a black zombie. So you're just able to like fit extra zombies into your deck while maintaining a good amount of interaction in this list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something that I really like about it. So definitely, if you like tribal zombies and you've kind of been itching to play something like that, I would recommend Narfi. He's really fun.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Well, that's all we have to talk about today. There's going to be another historic Brawl festival at the end of this month, so I hope to see you guys in the queues. But with that, I'm going to give a brief thank you to our Patreon patrons. They are Gustav, Ryan, Mark, Amond, Addison, Mason, Rick, Laser, Raphael, Charlotte, The White Clays, Hannah, Anthony, Andy, Dylan, James, Justin, Roger, Logan, Evan, Bryce, Dylan, Benjamin, Jamie, Matthew, Jason, Kyle, Brandon, Kydell, Jeremy, Russell, Troy, Dylan, Walter, Leo, Ian, John, Tom, Kevin, and Micah. Thank you all for supporting the show. And if you are not currently a Patreon patron but would like to become one, please check us out at patreon.com/Commander Theory. Thanks for listening. If any of you theorists want to get in touch with us, I am at Commander Theory on Twitter and Tumblr, and Zach is at Fat Bartleby on Twitter. Our theme song is Lincoln Continental by Entropy, and you can check them out on SoundCloud. Until next time, we're going back to the drawing board.